if you go down to the bottom keyboard, you find another one. They all have a different character. They have a little different sound to them. So those are really, really pretty stuff. And if they come in an 8-foot, you can also hear it at a 4-foot, which is just an octave higher. It's just that much higher. And then you can also hear it at a 2-foot level. So if you put all three of them together, it's a bigger sound, and so those are the flute stops of the organ, and they're really, really beautiful, you know. So we've got flute stops pretty much on every one of the keyboards, okay? So those are the flute stops.
And the music tells you which stop to pull out, or is this
sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. The music dictates that. That depends on the composer, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit. Okay, so those are the flute stops, which are kind of the quieter stops, a little bit softer. There are also string stops on the pipe organ that would kind of imitate the strings, for example, in an orchestra. Okay, so you usually find those in the swell division. I'm just going to play a little bit of that for you, and then I'm going to play a couple of pieces actually so you can hear it. So this is really, really pretty.
You can make it sound like a cello?
Well, almost sounds like a little string section in an orchestra. Yeah. Really pretty. That's really pretty. Yeah. So you've got string stops on the swell division in this organ, and on the great division you've got a string stop, which is a gamba, which would be imitative like of a cello, you know. So we've got flute stops, string stops of different pitches and different levels, and then we have really, which is the most important, which is kind of the building block of the organ, which we call the diapasons or the principals. The pipes that you see in facade here, these are called the diapasons or the principal stops, okay? So in the towers on either side, those are the principal stops of the pedal, and those are 16 feet in length. So that lowest pipe is vibrating in the middle of the tower there. That's 16 feet in length. And in the facade pipes here, which are in the front, it would be the great 8-foot principal in this. You can hear the right in front of you. So those are the stops that you would use to help support the congregation, because they're big enough where they can support congregational singing. So they can be at various pitches as well. So if you have just the 8-foot stop alone, it sounds like this. If you had it at the 4-foot level, the 4-foot pipes are sounding with the 8-foot. And then it can even go to a 2-foot level. What's happening with the sound? It's getting brighter, right? So then, if you add what we call a mixture, which is a compound stop, if you notice this mixture, for example, has a Roman numeral 4 under it, that means that there are not 1, 2, or 3 pipes sounding when you play that stop, but there are 4 sounding at the same time. What that does is it gives brilliance to the upper sound, so it starts very, very, very brighter as you go up. So if you add that to the 8, 4, and 2, it gives it so much more brilliance. So it depends on the size of the congregation and how many people are worshiping with you when you pick out the registrations that you're going to be using, because sometimes the organist plays too loud and then you give up on singing, okay? So you can't do that as well. So then there are also stops that imitate some of the brass instruments or the reed stops in the orchestra. They're usually called trumpet, which they sound like a trumpet. So here's the great up here in the swell. And then you have that same thing in the great, only it sounds a little bit different. It's a bigger stop. And then in another division, they're more to be used as a solo stop, a bigger stop, so these are even bigger. And if you put it on at the 16-foot, 8-foot, and 4-foot level, so that's a much bigger sound. And then there are smaller reed stops too. So when you have a reed stop, you actually have a pipe, and you don't see any of them here, and you actually have a reed and a shallot that vibrates. So when the air goes up through that pipe, the reed vibrates, and that's where you get the sound from.
How does the air get to the pipe?
All of these pipes are on each one of these keyboards is called a division. All the pipes are sitting on top of what we call a wind chest. So underneath all of these pipes, you can't see it with all this beautiful woodwork, are wind chests. So they're large wooden boxes where there's pressurized wind that's blown
Like
in.
the compressor?
So the wind is blown into the wind chest at a certain per square inch, and it's maintained at that pressurized level. So when you push down a note, what happens is the wind is allowed to go up through the toe of the pipe, the bottom of the pipe. All those pipes underneath there's a hole, what we call the toe. So when you play a note, air is now vibrating up in that pipe. As soon as you release it, it stops. But as long as I hold that note down, I can hold this note down forever,
And it will continue.
and it continues.
With your foot, if you combine the foot with the key, is that changing the air or not at all?
No, every manual will have a separate wind chest for it to control it. So if you're vibrating bigger pipes like a 16-foot pipe, they take more wind to work them through. Okay. On this organ, in the pedals, are two stops of 32 feet length, which means the lowest pipe. You can actually feel those vibrating.
Without even hitting a key,
No, I'm playing the keyboard.
not a keyboard.
No, I'm playing these with my feet. So that's like a principal stop. This stop is called a contrabombard. That's what you see on the wall over there. Those are wooden resonators, and they're they don't sound like a whole lot together, but when you put them together with a full ensemble, it's a pretty big sound. It's a pretty big sound. So
It's a pressure box, so much PSI in a box.
Correct.
Is there so many stops you can limit? You can't pull them all out because you're going to draw that PSI down
you
pretty
can,
quick.
you can.
Then I hear a generator going in the back, kicking in, right?
That depends on
You know?
that depends on the blower. Usually, an
Okay.
organ of this size will have probably a 18 to 20 horsepower blower.
Okay.
So it's a large blower that provides wind for.
So in general, you don't pull out a whole bunch of stops. because
Well, you do. I mean, it
Okay, you
depends on
can.
yeah
Okay,
what you're
alright,
doing.
alright.
So if a keyboard has 61 notes, 61 keys to it, there's 61 pipes for each one of these stops. So this organ and each one of these stops contains 61 pipes. So, and that's called a rank. So a rank of pipes would be this whole all the way up to here. So this organ has 79 ranks of pipes. So there are probably over 5,000 pipes on this organ, and you don't get to see them.
Yeah.
You don't get to see them. How do you control the volume? Well, there's two ways of controlling that. Number one is just adding more stops. That's one way, because the stops are just there. Another way is to actually have the stops in a box with shutters. And you open and close the shutters, and that controls the volume. So behind these pipes, there is this, what we call the swell division, and all the pipes in that division are in a box with shutters, just like shutters.
Like a dampener.
And it's controlled by this pedal. So when you close the shutters, you open the shutters, the sound gets bigger. So you hear it more so when you've got, so shutters closed. When you open it, it's louder. So it controls the volume by the opening and the closing of the shutters. So that's really the only two ways that you can control the organ, particular divisions of the organ.
The stops are either fully out or all.
They're either out, they're pulled out or pushed in. Yep. And then there are some smaller reed stops. This organ has some really beautiful stops. One is a clarinet, which is really it really sounds kind of like a clarinet, doesn't it? It's really a pretty stop. And then so that's more of a little solo stop. That's really pretty. There's another solo stop on this bottom keyboard called a crumhorn. The crumhorn was actually a small reed stop of the Baroque period. And then, so the pipes that are behind me, they sit on a rail. If you looked up at the cathedral when you came in, they sit on this back rail. It's called, in German, it's called a Rückpositiv, because Rück in German means behind. So the pipes are behind you. So all of the pipes in this bottom keyboard, they're not actually here, but they're here, okay? Did you notice the pipes that were sticking out horizontally from this case? Okay. They're called horizontal, or in French, enchaînade, which means this way. This organ has what we call a fanfare trumpet, which is a very big stop, big solo stop. Use that for fanfares or for weddings and that kind of thing. And I'll demonstrate little pieces with each one of those. So it's up to the organist to be able to control all these different sounds depending on what he or she is playing and for what purpose. Back hundreds of years ago, organs did not have computerized assist, so the organist had to either push or pull the stops, him or herself, okay? Nowadays, with modern technology, we have what we call a computerized capture system. And you notice these little buttons, there's buttons here, in between the keyboards, and some of them are duplicated down below. So you can set registrations, and they will automatically set for you. So you can change from loud to soft real quickly without even having to pull these on and off, because these will do it for you.
I was wondering what those are for.
Yeah.
It's like setting a chord.
Right, so some of them are duplicated down there. So, the organist has the capabilities to set those however he wishes or she wishes to do so. So that's kind of pretty much. So the design of the organ over the course of hundreds of years has not changed. We've got organs back in the medieval period that are still playing. We've got organs in Bach's time that are still playing, that are 300-400 years old. That's why pipe organs, for example, are very hard to build and very costly to build, because it's all they're all handcrafted. Nothing is pre-designed. The design principles have not changed over the course of hundreds of years. Pipes are made in the factory. They're rolled in the factory. All the work is done in the factory. The woodworking of an organ. So there's woodworking departments. There's pipe making departments. There's console design departments. All this is done in-house. No two organs are alike. Every organ is designed to fit that particular room it's going in, whether it's going in a church, whether it's going in a concert hall, a practice room at a university. What determines the size of the instrument? Pretty much the size of the building, And a bigger instrument doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be louder. It's going to be louder by default because it's a large instrument. But the bigger the instrument is, it gives you more capabilities in terms of varieties of sound and ways that you can accompany the choir in a congregation. So, how does the organ function for us in Catholic worship? Well, in any Catholic church or cathedral, the organ's primary function is to lead the congregation in song, right? It's also designed to play organ literature, but its primary role is to accompany the literature, accompany the hymns, the psalms, the sung acclamations, and then to be able to provide, organ literature as well. So that's what's special about the organ. So an organ of this size, this organ it's been in here a number of years, 79 ranks. This probably would be $3.5 million replacement value at this point, if you were to replace this organ.
Is there a critical piece of equipment here? I mean,
Everything is in that it, everything works off of something else in terms of the design. I mean, the basic design principles, are the pipe work. The way that pipes are voiced. You notice every pipe has a mouth. We call that the mouth of the pipe. You see that? I mean, so that's where the sound is coming from, that mouth. And you've got this two little pieces of metal on either side, like this. So what that does is basically help channel the sound coming from that pipe. So the air comes and hits the labial of that pipe, and that's of course where you get the sound from. And you can hear them coming. So it's purely mechanical, aside from the electric blower and the combination action to change the stops. Everything is mechanical. So that's why organs are very expensive to design. When organs are built and designed the way that they're supposed to be designed, with proper maintenance, they'll last hundreds of years. And a lot of times churches will say, we can't afford a big pipe organ, we're going to get an electronic. That's certainly up to the church's discretion. It'd be far more cost effective to build a smaller pipe organ and maintain it, and it's going to last for hundreds of years. Electronic technology continues to change daily. You know that. I mean, you get an iPhone today, and tomorrow there's an upgrade to an iPhone 8, and then an upgrade to a 9, and so forth. The basic principles don't change with that.
What's involved in preventive maintenance typically? Cleaning
So,
what-
maintenance. There are two things that things that really affect the pipe organ in a general sense. That is temperature
Okay.
and humidity.
Yeah.
So when the temperature and the humidity in a room are maintained, the organ will stay in tune much better than not. If the temperature fluctuates, for example, if they keep this room at 65 in a winter day when no one's here, and turn up the heat to 80 on Sunday morning, the organ is going to be out of tune on Sunday morning if it was tuned to 65 during the day, because the temperature has changed. Wow. So what happens is pipes, both wooden and metal, contract or expand, so that changes the pitch.
Right.
So for an organ to really maintain its pitch value and stay in tune, there's a certain level of humidity.
Constant environment.
And exactly.
Yeah.
Down south, where we have a lot more humidity, for example, where I am, even more so. Usually within 4 or 5 degrees, say for example, they keep this room at 65 during the day and maybe turn it up to 70 for weekends, the organ should come back into tune.
what's it take to tune it?
It depends on how badly it's out of tune. The stops usually that go out of tune first are the reed stops. And so it depends on how many of those are out of tune, like these stops. Like right now, this organ is in really great tune. So they usually will tune the reed stops, and everything else pretty much stays where it is. But if you were to do a complete tuning of this organ, it would probably take a week, 12 hours a day to go through the entire organ. But usually you just touch up where it needs to be touched up. And pipes do out of tune. It just depends on that.
You had something.
Well, I was just wondering, in the body heat, that if you turn it up by, obviously you're saying that room temperature doesn't fluctuate too much.
Right.
But then you fill up the room, does it immediately change? Will that affect you?
Not so much. It does a little bit. It just depends on how many people are in the room. That shouldn't affect it all that much. But usually, you know, if the room is maintained within 3 or 4 degrees or so forth, and it's not good because eventually, you know, the wood will dry out, you know, if it's too humid or too dry. There are a lot of leather components to the organ, leather pouches that are part of that. Over the course of 20, 25 years, those leather parts of the organ need to be repaired or replaced. So all that plays into it really being you know, temperature controlled. So let's move along. So what I'd like to do is just to play a few short little snippets of sections to hear some of the stops that I talked about, and you can listen. So I'm going to start with a very soft piece by Handel from his opera Largo from Circe, and you'll hear the string stops of the organ. I'm going to start with the softer stops, and we'll get to some louder stuff in just a little bit. So just to hear some of the beautiful, more of the solo stops on the organ. So you're reading 3 staffs of music instead of one for the left hand, one for the right hand, and one for the pedals. Really pretty. Just get like an orchestra at your hands. Okay.
Was this written for organ?
No, it's transcribed for organ. Yeah, this particular piece.
How was some of those keys going down without you pushing down on them?
Because you're coupling one keyboard to another manually. So in other words, I coupled the positive to the grade, and you'll see sometimes, or if you're coupling to the pedal, because it's mechanical, it's an actual pull down. So which is neat.
You thought a plane was complicated.
Oh, trust me, I wouldn't even begin to go there. But depending on what he does. Okay, so now let's listen to something that's got a little bit more beef to it. And give some nice. This will be a little bit bigger piece. This is a piece by Charpentier, who is a French Baroque composer. It's based on the Te Deum. So this gives you an idea of a little bit more of a fuller sound to the organ. This is a great piece for a wedding. Use it often for weddings. So, this room you hear has quite a reverberance. It has about 4 or 5 seconds to it, which is wonderful. So that's more of a fuller sound. So if we wanted to hear this sound and hear like that fanfare trumpet with a little more of a festive nature to make it even that much for a festival, we can do this. These are just some of the great organ stops, the fuller stops for accompaniment and for solo stuff. So then let me play for you just a couple of other little pieces as well. I know we're short on time, which is play just a little bit of a Bach piece to give you an idea what Bach sounds like on the organ. This is the Bach Fantasy in G major, one of Bach's early works. great stuff. This instrument can play any literature that is written for the organ, which is amazing. So, just one more, couple little things, then we've got to head over. We talked about music in the church back in the Baroque period. Catholic Mass, in between the parts of the Mass that were sung, the Kyrie, the Gloria and Sanctus, normally the organist would play in dialogue with those chanted parts. So, for example, the choir would sing the Kyrie, and then the organist would improvise or play a piece in dialogue with that choir. So, a French composer of the Baroque period, Couperin, wrote 2 masses for organ, one called the Mass for the Convents, which is smaller in structure, and a Mass for the parishes. And so in between certain parts of the Mass, the organist would play in dialogue with the Kyrie that was sung, for example, or the Gloria. So I'm just going to close by playing, this is the first couplet from the Kyrie. So the choir would sing the Kyrie, and then the organist would improvise on that particular chant melody. So I'll play just that as we close. This is the opening movement from this match, which is really beautiful. Kyrie again, and so on and so forth. So this was, we talked about dialogue in the Mass between the sung parts and the spoken parts between the congregation and so forth. This is what the practice was in the Baroque period before the organ became much more orchestral. As we move from the Baroque period in the 1700s and the 1800s and the 1900s, the organ became much more orchestral, which meant there were more kind of orchestral stops like the oboes, the trumpets, and so forth. So the organs became bigger. So the literature for the organ was lot longer pieces, bigger pieces, incorporated much more of the organ than, for example, back in Bach's time when they were smaller than they would be like the 18th and 19th century. We'll close with a hymn, just to kind of give you an idea of how the organ can be used for a hymn. So, does anyone have a favorite hymn? No? Nobody?
Amazing Grace.
Amazing Grace? Wonderful. That's nice. Good. Okay. So we'll close with Amazing Grace. Give you an idea of, what you would do. So I would play this like I would be playing it for a congregation, a healthy congregation singing. Okay? So, So there you have it. All right, Gabriel, thank you so much for letting us combine for a few minutes. We're done. We're on our way out, right on time. Thank you, folks. Awesome.